International Lecture tahun 2026, dan pada sesi ini, sesi yang terakhir, kita akan mendengarkan pemaparan dari Profesor Umberto Pagano. Nah, perkuliahannya dalam bahasa Inggris, nanti dan di akhir di sesi tanya jawab, kalau seandainya kalian kesulitan, pakai bahasa Indonesia juga nggak apa-apa. Oke. Kita mulai ya. Welcome students and colleagues, good afternoon. My name is Umar Baihaki. I'm the moderator of this lecture, and in this pleasant day, we reach the 15th sessions in the Eurasia International Lecture Series 2026 program. This program is supported by the Eurasia Foundation Japan in collaboration with the Faculty of Social Science and Law, Universitas Negeri Jakarta. And thank you for students who have taken the time and consistently participated in every lecture. And also thank you to all my colleagues in the committee program who organized all the sessions until this day. And hopefully we have a very, very good lecture from our speaker today. And in this afternoon, we are honored to have Professor Umberto Pagano from the University Magna Graecia of Catanzaro, Italy. And welcome, Professor. Thank you for joining us. And I assume it's quite challenging since in your place, I think it's still 8 a.m. in the morning, yeah?
Yes, it's 8 in the morning.
Yeah. And before we begin, please allow me to use a few minutes from the program to give some remarks, information about our session today. The participants who come in this class and also in the Zoom meeting comes from a diverse study program. Yeah, some of them are from the sociology study program, and others from communication study program, Islamic study program, and other study program in the faculty. So it's quite diverse, professors. Not all of them has a vast knowledge of sociology. But I am sure since we are mostly discussing about methodology and how doing research with AI, I think all of the students can relate their experience with the topic that we are about to discuss. And a brief profile of our speaker today. Yeah. Associate Professor, Professor Umberto Pagano, PhD, is an Associate Professor of General Sociology at the Department of Law, Economics, and Sociology of the University Magna Graecia of Catanzaro. His academic profile combines sociological theory, analysis of social change, and the study of ecological, digital, and institutional transitions, with particular attention to inclusion, welfare, health, food cultures, urban transformations, temporality, and social acceleration. His recent work is especially focused on the sociological interpretation of transitions, the social implications of artificial intelligence, inclusive education, algorithmic governance, sustainability, and meta-sustainability, and the relationship between complexity and contemporary forms of social organizations. And since last year, in March 2025, Professor Umberto Pagano has qualified to full professor positions in the university, and he teaches in Magna Graecia of Catanzaro University. He teaches sociology, sociological theory, and sociology of culture. He has various international experience and also very productive in writing. Up until today, Professor Umberto Pagano already published more than 70 texts in form of journal articles, books, manuscript, and book chapters. So, are you ready, Professor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. And good morning, everybody. And First of all, thank you. Thank you for hosting me. I would like to be there with you. Uh, I was there last year. It was great, and I would like to come there very, very soon. So today we will discuss artificial intelligence, not simply as a new digital tool, but as a development that may change the way social scientists produce knowledge. AI is already used to summarize text, organize information, explore databases, draft research materials, identify themes, and build possible scenarios. For students, researchers, and organizations, these possibilities are attractive because they promise speed and access to a much larger amount of material. However, sociology cannot stop at the question of efficiency. Social scientists uh, do not only process information, uh, they decide which questions matter, which categories are appropriate, which relations are meaningful, and how interpretations can be defended. This is why the entrance of AI into research raises a central question. Does it only assist sociology, or does it also transform what we understand as sociological knowledge? The lecture will follow a balanced path, I hope. First, we will examine opportunities. AI can help researchers uh, to compare large collections of texts, explore theoretical connections, and develop simulations of complex social phenomena. These capacities should not be dismissed. A critical position is credible only if it recognizes what the technology can genuinely do. Second, we will examine risks. AI systems can generate highly fluent answers without understanding social experience. They can suggest categories or interpretations whose origin is difficult to reconstruct. They can make simulations appear more reliable than the complex social reality they represent. If researchers begin to accept these outputs without sufficient scrutiny, a tool of assistance may become a source of dependency. The central topic remains the impact of AI on social sciences, on theory, on empirical research, and also on the role of the sociologist itself. Only at the end uh, will I add one wider sociological consequence. When AI increases the productivity of cognitive work, the time gained by individuals may be transformed by organizations into higher expectations and greater pressure. So, our guiding question today is not simply whether AI is good or bad. It is a more demanding question. Under which conditions can AI expand sociological inquiry without weakening the critical, interpretive, and responsible character of the discipline? Many university students now use AI in ordinary study practice. I think you do, of course. Some use it for translation, some for a first explanation of a difficult concept, some for summarizing an article, and some for improving the form of a written assignment. This is not a marginal issue. It means that AI is becoming part of the ordinary environment in which knowledge is studied and produced. It is to recognize that technological change often begins through routine practices, long before institutions define clear rules. A tool is first tried occasionally, maybe, because it is convenient. Then its use becomes normal. Finally, it may become expected. If a task can be completed more quickly with AI, those who do not use it may appear slow or inefficient. For sociology, an important distinction begins here. Asking an AI system to correct grammar is not the same as asking an AI system to decide the main themes in a set of interviews. Asking it to translate a text is not the same as asking it to explain the social meaning of an observed practice. All these activities use the same technology, but they do not transfer the same degree of intellectual responsibility. This is one of the central arguments of this lecture. The issue is not simply whether we use AI. The issue is what we delegate to it. Some delegations may reduce routine workload while leaving the researcher in control, but other delegations may affect the core of the interpretation itself. Keep this difference in mind. At the end of the lecture, we will return to it and wonder a more difficult question. Which parts of sociological work would you be prepared to delegate? And which part would you consider inseparable from your responsibility as a researcher? Why should artificial intelligence be discussed in a sociology course rather than only in a course on digital techniques? Well, because sociology studies not only technology as objects, but also how technologies reorganize social practices, institutions, and knowledge. Consider technologies that are already familiar. The smartphone, for example. The smartphone did not simply make communication easier, it changed expectations of availability. People can now be contacted at almost any moment, and the boundary between work and private life is often less clear. Social media. Social media did not simply enable communication. They transformed public visibility, reputation, political communication, and presentation of the self. In the same way, AI is not simply an instrument added to research, while everything else remains unchanged. It may change the relationship between the researcher and the material being studied. It may influence what counts as an important theme, what appears to be a reasonable hypothesis, and how quickly an interpretation is expected to be produced. This question has an epistemological dimension. If an AI system proposes a classification of the subjects studied, identifies the main themes of a corpus, or generates an explanation of a phenomenon, we must ask where the interpretation comes from. Can the researcher reconstruct the step? Can the proposed categories be justified? Can alternative interpretations be made visible? It also has a political dimension. Categories are not innocent labels. Classifying people as risky or vulnerable or deviant or employable, etc., classifying people can produce effects in their lives, especially when classifications are used by public institutions and organizations. If AI participates in making such classifications, sociologists must study its biases and consequences. Finally, it has an organizational dimension. A technology that allows more material to be processed in less time can improve the depth of research, but it can also increase demands for output and speed. The same technical possibility may support better knowledge or generate stronger pressures, depending on the institutional context in which is used. For this reason, I'm going to talk about three sociological concepts: knowledge, power, and organization. Knowledge, because AI enters the construction of interpretation. Power, because its classifications and predictions may orient decisions. Organization, because its efficiency may change standards, roles, and working conditions. Serious discussion must begin by recognizing that AI provides real opportunities for social research. If we present AI only as a threat, we do not understand why researchers, students, and institutions are attracted to it. The attraction is not irrational. AI can respond to concrete difficulties of contemporary research. One important difficulty is the size of the material. Sociologists increasingly analyze large collections of tests, policy documents, public comments, online discussions, newspaper archives, organizational communications, interview transcripts, digital narratives. Traditional close reading remains essential, but it becomes difficult to use alone when the corpus is very large. AI can assist in searching, organizing, and preliminary exploring such material. A second opportunity concerns comparison. Researchers may want to identify how a concept is used across several contexts, compare different narratives of the same social problem, or explore possible links between different theoretical traditions. AI can rapidly suggest recurring language, contrasts, and potential connection. Used carefully, this can widen the field of questions that the researcher considers. A third opportunity concerns simulations and scenarios. Social phenomena often involve many interacting elements, individual decisions, institutional rules, economic conditions, cultural meanings, and unintended consequences. Computational methods and AI support systems may help us construct possible scenarios and ask what might happen under particular assumptions. This can be useful in studying migration, inequality, public policy, or collective behavior. I stress these potential contributions because sociology should not become defensive when new analytical capacities emerge. AI can support the researcher in exploring materials and imagining questions that would otherwise require a very long preliminary effort. But the first limit must immediately be stated. An exploratory result is not the same as a justified sociological finding. A suggested theme is not automatically a meaningful category. A plausible scenario is not automatically a prediction of reality. A theoretical connection proposed by a model is not automatically a valid interpretation. Thus, the promise of AI is important, but it must be located correctly. AI may increase the range of what researchers can examine, but it does not remove the need for theoretical judgment, empirical verification, and responsibility for the final interpretation. Usefulness is greatest when it expands the work of the sociologist rather than silently replacing the difficult part of that work. I argue that these opportunities are real, but they remain opportunities for inquiry, not automatic guarantees of valid sociological knowledge. One of the most interesting uses of AI for social theory is what I call assisted hermeneutic comparison. Sociology is a discipline built through comparison between Weber and contemporary rationalization, between theories of modernity and current digital life, between older concepts of community and new forms of online belonging. These comparisons can be intellectually productive, but they require extensive reading and careful reconstruction. AI can be useful at the exploratory stage. It can help a researcher search for possible points of contact across many texts. It can suggest that a concept used in one tradition may be compared with a problem discussed in another. It can organize an initial map of similarities and differences. For a student beginning in a topic, this may offer orientation. For a researcher, it may suggest a direction worth investigating. Suppose, for example, that we want to relate Weber's concept of rationalization to the use of algorithmic decision in public administration. An AI system could rapidly identify similarities in language about calculability, predictability, or formal procedures. This may be a useful starting point, but the system has not thereby established the theoretical meaning of comparison. It has offered a possible route that the researcher must investigate. This is where Gadamer remains valuable. In hermeneutic thought, understanding is not a mechanical extraction of meaning from the text. It is a situated encounter between an interpreter, a question, and a tradition. Concepts have histories. They respond to problems. They gain meaning with an intellectual horizon. A model can produce a fluent comparison, but it does not inhibit a historical situation or take responsibility for asking why the comparison matters. The danger is particularly strong because AI generated prose can be elegant. Comparison may sound theoretical rich while being based on a shallow similarity. Students may recognize this problem when they ask an AI system to compare two authors and receive a polished answer that uses the names correctly but removes tension, contradiction, and historical specificity. The appropriate use of an AI assisted comparison is therefore limited, but not insignificant. It may help us ask questions to map possible relations and identify passages to read. It cannot replace reading the texts, reconstructing the author's problems, and making an argued judgment about whether a connection is meaningful or not. For sociologists, the lesson is simple but important. AI can expand the field of comparison, but interpretation begins only when we can explain why a connection matters for understanding the social world. This is why assisted comparison is useful, while Gadamer reminds us that understanding still depends on a situated and historical and a personal relation to the text. Second important possibility concerns sociological simulations. Social processes often emerge from interactions among many actors and conditions: inequality, residential segregation, migration, collective protests, and opinion formation are not produced by one cause alone. They develop through networks of choices, constraints, institutions, and the feedback effects. Computational models have long tried to study these processes. AI may now increase their complexity and flexibility. A model can represent agents who interact under different rules and then examine what patterns emerge. Researchers may use such simulations to explore the consequences of climate shocks for migration, the possible effects of welfare policies, the development of economic inequalities, or the diffusion of a political opinion. This use has an important scientific value. A simulation is not necessarily a prediction. It can be disciplined way of asking. If these assumptions are accepted, what consequences may follow? It makes assumptions explicit and allows us to test the internal logic of an explanation. In this sense, it may function as a theoretical laboratory. However, the sociological problem begins with the selection of what enters the model. Every simulation must define actors, motivations, variables, and relations. These choices are not neutral. They already contain an interpretation of the phenomenon. Imagine a model of migration. It may include employment opportunities, distance, border controls, and income. These are relevant variables. But migrations also involves family obligations, memories, fear, legal insecurity, identity, networks of trust, and expectation of dignity. If the model includes only what can be conveniently quantified, it risks treating a social experience as a simplified decision problem. This is why the model cannot be confused with society. It can make some mechanisms visible, but it can also make other dimensions disappear. The more detailed and convincing a simulation becomes, the easier it is to forget that it rests on a prior decision about what matters. Latour is useful here because he emphasizes that sociological work should follow associations rather than assume associations in advance. It does not mean refusing simulation. It means that simulated patterns should be continuously confronted with actors, practices, objects, institutions, and controversies in the empirical world. AI supported simulations can therefore be valuable tools for social science, but they remain models, partial constructions that assist thought. If they are presented as complete description of social life, they may produce a sophisticated form of reductionism, a society made manageable by excluding precisely the complexity that sociology is meant to understand. Simulations can be powerful, but Latour helps us to remember that the model never exhausts the complexity of actual relations. The risk of AI become more serious when a model does not simply help to analyze a situation, but participates in decisions that affect people's life. Prediction is never entirely separate from intervention when it is used by organization or public institutions. Consider examples such as predictions of school dropout, risk of reoffending, eligibility for welfare assistance, employability of likelihood of financial default. A system may produce a score that appears objective and technically precise. But once a person receives that classification, institutions may treat them differently. They may be monitored more closely, offered fewer opportunities, or placed into a more restrictive procedure. Here, sociology provides a classical insight. Robert Merton described the self fulfilling prophecy, a definition of situation can provoke actions that make the initial expected outcome more likely. If a student is classified as high likely to fail, the institution may reduce investment or lower expectations. This treatment may contribute to the failure that the prediction appeared only to anticipate. Let me offer another example. Imagine that a public administration uses an AI supported simulation to anticipate the consequences of evicting an occupied building. The model predicts a high probability of protest, confrontation, and public disorder. Because of this prediction, authorities decide to prepare a larger policy presence and a larger police presence, adopt stricter security measures, and communicate with the occupants in a more defensive and confrontational manner. But people involved do not react only on the original decision, they also react to the way the decision is implemented. A stronger police presence may be interpreted as hostility. Defensive communication may increase distrust. Activities may conclude that the authorities have already defined them as threats. As a consequence, mobilization may become more intense. Tensions may increase. Protest may become more likely. If this happens, the simulation appears to have been correct. Yet the prediction was not simply observing a future event. It became a part of the situation and helped to shape the behavior of the actors involved. This is the mechanism that Merton described through the concept of the self fulfilling prophecy. A prediction may contribute to creating the very reality that it appears merely to anticipate. For sociologists, this is a crucial lesson. Human beings are not passive objects like inert materials or rocks. They interpret classifications, expectations, and predictions. Once a prediction enters the social world, it can modify the world that it claims to describe. Let us be clear. This is not a problem created by artificial intelligence. It concerns the status of social research itself from beginning. But algorithmic systems intensify this issue because they can classify large numbers of people quickly and with an appearance of neutrality. Yet the data used to train or inform models frequently contain historical inequalities. If certain groups have previously been subject to discrimination, surveillance, or unequal opportunities, a model may identify those patterns as reliable indicators of risk. The problem is not that the machine has a prejudice, as a human actor may have it. The problem is that a technical system can translate social inequality into a classification that appears impartial and then becomes operational. For social researchers, there are two consequences. First, we must study algorithmic classification as objects of social power. Who develops them? What data they use? Who can challenge them? Second, we use AI in research. We must be aware that it may privilege dominant patterns and overlook minority experiences or emerging practices. What is statistically frequent is not always what is sociologically most important. A rare account, an anomalous case, or a form of behavior not yet recognized in existing categories may be precisely what social change becomes visible, when becomes visible, and where becomes visible. Thus, AI based prediction is not merely a technical improvement in description. When inserted into institutions, it can influence the very reality it claims to measure. This leads to a more radical question. Could AI contribute to a sort of hyper-real sociology? I use this phrase to indicate a sociology in which representations, models, and simulations become more central than direct engagement with social world. The theoretical reference here, of course, is Jean Baudrillard. His concept of simulation is not simply the idea that an image is false. The deeper concern is that representations can become more convincing, more orderly, and more functional than the reality they supposedly represent. At that point, the simulation no longer merely reflects reality. It begins to replace it as the main object of attention and decision. Applied to social research, the problem can be formulated in this way. AI systems are often trained on text, data, and classifications already produced by society and by earlier research. They can generate new summaries, interpretations, and scenarios from those materials. If the researchers base new works primarily on these generated representations, and if future systems differential environment to make Baudrillard's concept concrete in everyday experience, think of social media photo filters. Then the filtered image looks cleaner, more perfect, and more attractive than everyday life. And people may come to prefer the representation to the physical true reality. In sociology, the hyperreal risk arises when an artificial intelligence generated model of society becomes so neat and easily available that we prefer studying the clean model rather than engaging with the messy, unpredictable realities of actual human groups. A model can be clean, coherent, and immediately available. Instead, social life is difficult. Actors can contradict themselves. Institutions change, and new phenomena emerge without fitting existing frameworks. Yard helps us name the risk. The model appears to offer a complete social world while reducing the unpredictability and the friction of actual experience. To understand the epistemic risk more precisely, we need to consider what generative AI does particularly well. It produces language that sounds appropriate. Large language models are able to compose clear summaries, structured arguments, and plausible theoretical connections. Fluency is useful, but it is also the source of a major misunderstanding because we easily associate in our brain well formed language with understanding. Whatever position one takes on the wider philosophy of AI, the distinction is important for research. Producing a suitable linguistic answer is not the same as understanding a social phenomenon. Large language models identify and reproduce patterns in enormous textual corpora. They can generate highly persuasive sentences, but their output may repeat biases, dominant narratives, and unexamined assumptions contained in the data on which they depend. Floridi offers another useful formula. AI may display agency without intelligence. A system can act within a process, generate consequences, and influence decisions without possessing the kind of understanding and responsibility that we attribute to human interpretation. This distinction is very important in concrete sociological work. In sociological research, a concept must do more than sound intelligent. It must be justified in relation to empirical evidence and theoretical reasoning. It must make alternative readings visible. It must be open to criticism. Therefore, the most dangerous AI error may not be an obviously false answer. It may be a fluent, reasonable, and academically sounding answer that we accept too quickly. The task of the sociologist is to reopen what fluency tends to close. The questions of meaning, evidence, context, and responsibility. We can now introduce the fundamental distinction of this lecture between instrumental delegation and epistemic delegation. Distinction helps us avoid two simplistic positions. It prevents us from saying that every use of AI is unacceptable. It also prevents us from treating every use as a harmless technical aid, because it's not like this. So, instrumental delegation occurs when technology helps to carry out tasks without deciding the meaning of the research. For example, AI may assist in transcription, recorded interviews, organizing files, correcting formatting, searching for passages in a large corpus of texts, producing a chart from categories already defined by the researcher, or translating. These uses require checking, but the researcher remains responsible for the research question and interpretation. There is a long history of distributing cognitive tasks across tools and techniques and environments. Clark and Chalmers developed the idea of the extended mind, according to which external devices can become integrated into cognitive practices. Notes, databases, maps, and calculators do not necessarily weaken thought. They may make complex reasoning possible. This is instrumental delegation when we use a calculator. Epistemic delegation is different. It occurs when the system participates in the operation through which meaning is produced, defining categories, deciding, deciding which themes matter, formulating the main hypothesis, identifying the explanation of social process, or writing an interpretation that the researcher then accepts with only minor changes. Consider a qualitative study of student experiences of digital education. Using AI to transcribe interviews is mainly instrumental. Asking AI to highlight words connected with anxiety may be an exploratory intermediate use, provided that the researcher checks uh, the output. One second. Asking AI to identify the main dimensions of educational inequality, construct a typology of students, and explain the meaning of their experiences. These transfers are much more significant part of the interpretive task. The problem is not that the letter request must never be made. An AI generated interpretation could be used as an object of critique or as one possible reading to test against the data. The problem arises when the suggestion is treated as a result without recognizing that the system has intervened in the epistemic core of the research. The concept of cognitive expropriation describe what may happen when epistemic delegation becomes normal. The expression is intentionally strong, but its meaning is specific. It does not suggest that the researchers suddenly stop thinking. It indicates that they may gradually lose control over the point at which interpretation originates. In traditional qualitative analysis, the researcher may develop a category through a visible process, reading materials, comparing cases, noticing differences, revising an initial idea, and justifying why a final concept is appropriate. The process may be imperfect and open to criticism, but the researcher can describe it, interpretation as a genealogy. With the generative AI, a researcher can receive within seconds a set of themes, an explanatory framework, or a coherent theoretical paragraph. Because the output is readable and structured, it may be experienced as insight. Yet, the researcher cannot fully reconstruct why the model proposed those themes rather than others, or what alternative conceptual pathways were excluded. The risk is not simply copying an AI output. The deeper risk is that the researcher's work moves downstream. Instead of constructive, the interpretive architecture and then expressing it, the researcher receives an architecture already prepared and spends the time selecting, editing, and polishing it. The researcher becomes the curator of meaning generated elsewhere. This reminds me Heidegger's idea of Gestell, often translated as enframing. The point is not to claim that AI has intentions. It is to suggest that technologies can organize the field within which things appear relevant and available. A generative model, because of its training and statistical structure, makes some associations and forms of language more probable than others. It can therefore pre-structure what appears thinkable before the researcher is fully engaged with the material. This is particularly important in sociology because new theoretical ideas often emerge from what initially appears inconvenient, marginal, or anomalous. A model tends to produce coherent patterns, but empirical reality may demand that we remain with contradiction and ambiguity and errors rather than rapidly organize them into an elegant output. Cognitive expropriation is therefore a process, not a single event. It grows when speed, fluency, and institutional pressure make generated interpretations increasingly normal. The issue is not to prohibit tools, it is to protect the researcher's capacity to identify, justify, and take responsibility for the interpretive decisions that make sociological knowledge possible. Cognitive expropriation becomes more likely when AI generated forms are normalized. A single interaction with a model does not transform a discipline, but repeated and widespread use can slowly establish defaults, standard ways of writing, classifying, arguing, and even deciding what a social problem looks like. Here, Berger and Luckman provide a helpful sociological lens. They describe how socially produced realities become taken for granted. A practice is repeated, institutionalized, and eventually experienced as natural. Something similar can occur with algorithmic outputs. A category initially proposed by a model may be used because it is convenient. When it appears repeatedly across assignments, reports, or papers, its artificial origin becomes less visible. It begins to appear as an obvious description of the phenomenon. The normalization operates at the three levels. The first is stylistic. AI generated academic prose is often very smooth, balanced paragraphs, orderly release of controlled conclusion. Clarity is valuable, but extensive reliance on the same forms may make academic writing increasingly uniform. A discipline in which every text sounds similar may lose signs of genuine intellectual tension and situated voice. The second level concerns content. Language models are trained on large amounts of existing discourse. As a result, frequently represented narratives and mainstream concepts are particularly easy to reproduce. If we ask a model for an interpretation of poverty, migration, gender, or social media, it may return familiar approaches while making less visible minority perspectives, regional experiences, or conceptual innovations. In this sense, AI defaults risk narrowing our sociological imagination through dominant global narratives. The third level is inferential, and maybe it is the most serious. AI can construct a convincing causal or explanatory path. Phenomenon A is linked to condition B and therefore leads to consequence C. The path may be probable in textual data without being justified in our particular research, in our specific research. A sociological explanation must be supported by theory, by empirical material, and consideration of alternatives. It cannot be accepted merely because it is well phrased. A model can produce convincing language without understanding or evaluating the world it describes. Under the pressures of contemporary academic work, deadlines, publication demands, large datasets, convincing output may be treated as sufficient outputs. They are not. The sociological task is to denaturalize the default. We need to ask, why is this category here? Whose experience does it represent? Which alternatives has it excluded? What evidence support the proposed connection? In other words, AI requires not less sociology, but more reflexive sociology. The argument can now be summarized through 4 breaks in epistemic traceability. Traceability means the possibility of reconstructing, discussing, and defending the movement from empirical material to a scientific conclusion. It is essential because sociological knowledge is not only a finished text, it's also an accountable process. The first break concerns inferential transparency. When a researcher develops an interpretation, he should be able to show the relation between observations, conceptual decisions, and conclusions. A generative AI system can produce a fully formed interpretation, but the internal route that generated it is not available in the form of an understandable chain of reasons. We receive the output, not its intellectual history. This problem can be understood more clearly through Bruno Latour's concept of black box. A black box is not simply a machine whose internal operations are difficult to understand. For Latour, a black box emerges when a process becomes so totally accepted that people stop asking how it works. As long as a system produces results that appear reliable, attention shifts from the process to the outcome. The result is accepted. The path that generated it gradually disappears from view. It is not important anymore. In this sense, the success of a technology can actually make the more opaque, more incomprehensible. When a system always produces useful answers, people become less interested in questioning the way it produces those answers. This is a general problem of technology, and not only of technology. But AI creates a particularly interesting version of this problem. Research, Researchers often receive a classification, a summary, a comparison, or an interpretation that appears immediately plausible. Because the output is fluent and convincing, There is a temptation to focus on its usefulness rather than on its production. Over time, researchers may stop asking how a result was generated because the result itself appears satisfactory. The greatest danger is therefore not the technical complexity alone. The greatest danger arises when the question itself disappears. A black box is fully established not when nobody can understand it, but when nobody considers understanding as necessary. Latour's response was not to reject technologies or scientific instruments. Its response was to reopen the black box whenever possible, to reconstruct the actors, assumptions, decisions, and mediations that produce the result. With contemporary AI, this task becomes more difficult. We can investigate training data, design choices, institutional interprets, and contexts of use. Yet, the exact path leading from a prompt to the prompt to a particular answer may remain difficult to reconstruct. The black box can therefore be partially open, but maybe never completely. For this reason, sociologists should remain committed to epistemic traceability. The goal is not to reject AI outputs, but to preserve the habit of asking where they come from, how they were produced, and which assumption they contain. Once this question disappears, the researcher begins to lose control over the production of knowledge itself. This completes the discourse about the first break in epistemic traceability that I mentioned. The researcher may obtain a result without being able to reconstruct the path that produced it. The second break concerns replicability. Replicability is complex in social research, particularly in qualitative work. But the possibility of checking procedures remains crucial. Generative systems may provide different answers to the same or very similar prompt. This variability does not automatically make them unusable, but it means that a generated interpretation cannot simply be treated as a stable research result. The researcher must document and justify any use made of it. The third break concerns the justification of categories. Suppose an EA system proposes 5 categories for interview data. The categories may be attractive and coherent, but why 5? Why these? Which statements support each category? Which cases do not fit? Which theoretical assumptions are present? A category is sociologically meaningful only if it can be defended as an interpretive choice, not merely accepted as a generated suggestion. The fourth break concerns authorship and responsibility. A sociological author is not only a person whose name appears on a publication. The author is responsible for the inference and for the consequences of representation. If key interpretation have been generated through an opaque process, it may become difficult to determine which meanings generally belong to the researcher's analysis and which have been absorbed from the model. The practical conclusion is not that AI must be excluded. It is that any use involving interpretation requires a high level of transparency. clear disclosure, preservation of data-grounded reasoning, documentation of decisions, and continued ability to explain why a conclusion is sociological warranted. After this critical analysis, a reasonable question appears. If AI can summarize, classify, compare, and produce arguments, what remains for the sociologist? The answer requires us to reject a narrow view of sociology. The sociologist is not simply a producer of written outputs or data summarizes. Sociology is a complex practice of interpretation and responsibility. The sociologist must decide whether a category does justice to a social experience, whether an explanation excludes important voices, whether a model turns historical inequalities into apparently neutral facts, whether a conclusion can be publicly defended. These tasks cannot be reduced to producing a plausible text. They require judgment. This is why I introduced Kant, Immanuel Kant, in the discussion. In his account of enlightenment, immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without the direction of another. His invitation, Kant's invitation, is to dare to know, sapere aude in Latin language, to dare to exercise reason autonomously. The comparison should not be applied too mechanically to the digital present, because our situation is not simply a problem of individual courage. Today's technologies are integrated into institutions that reward speed, output, and constant availability. Delegation may be encouraged by the structure of academic and professional life. Nevertheless, the concept of judgment remains essential. If researchers use AI only to avoid the difficult work of understanding, they risk weakening the very capacity that defines their role. A discipline cannot remain critical if it treats interpretation as an obstacle to efficiency. At the same time, it would be insufficient to tell individual students and researchers simply to be responsible. Institutions matter. Universities and research communities need clear rules about transparency in the use of AI. They need teaching practices that distinguish exploratory existence from substitution of authorship. They need evaluation systems that do not reward only the speed and the quantity of production and publications. For future sociologists, technical competence will be necessary. You will need to understand how AI can assist analysis and where it may introduce bias or opacity. But technical competence is not enough. You will also need epistemic competence, the ability to justify a category, question a fluent answer, return to empirical world, and stay responsible for what you claim about other people's lives. Thus, AI does not make the sociologist unnecessary. It makes the sociologist's critical responsibility more visible and, in some respects, more demanding. Floridi is useful here because he insists that agency and understanding are not the same thing. This reinforces the idea that responsibility for meaning cannot be transferred to the tools. Until now, we have focused mainly on sociology as a form of knowledge production. But if artificial intelligence transforms the way researchers think, it is reasonable to ask whether it may also transform the way ordinary social actors make decisions. In classical sociology, agency refers to the capacity of individuals to act, interpret situations, and make choices within social constraints. Human beings are never completely free, but neither are the passive recipients of external forces. They interpret, evaluate, and decide. AI introduces a new form of mediation into this process. Increasingly, recommendations are present before deliberation is completed. We ask which route to follow, what product to buy, how to organize a task, how to formulate a message, which source to consult, or even how to understand a complex issue. The system does not usually force a decision, it suggests one. This distinction is important. Most contemporary AI systems do not operate through coercion. They do not force anything. They operate through guidance. Their influence lies not in imposing choices, but in shaping the field of options that appears most reasonable, efficient, or desirable. From a sociological perspective, this raises a significant question. What happens when guidance becomes permanent? What happens when social actors becomes accustomed to receiving pre-structured recommendation in an increasing number of situations? The risk is not the disappearance of agency. People will continue to choose, evaluate, and act. The risk is that agency becomes progressively mediated by systems whose criteria remain only partially visible. Decisions may remain formally ours, while increasingly depending on cognitive infrastructures we neither control nor fully understand. The challenge for future society is therefore not simply technological literacy, it is the preservation of reflexive agency, the capacity to step back from recommendation, question assumptions, and remain capable of independent judgment, even when assistance is constantly available. One of the most common narrative surrounding artificial intelligence is that it saves time. Researchers will analyze data more quickly. Professional, Professionals will write reports more efficiently. Students will study more effectively. In principle, all of this may be true. Yet, sociology teaches us that the social consequences of productivity are never automatic. Historically, many technological innovations promised liberation from labor. Mechanization, automation, and digitalization all generated expectations that people would eventually work less and enjoy more free time. In practice, the outcomes have often been have, the outcomes have often been more complex. When organizations discover that a task can be completed in half of the time, they do not necessarily reduce the workload. Frequently, they increase expectation. More reports can be written, more projects can be completed, more publications can be produced, more communication can be managed. The result is a paradox. A technology designed to save time may contribute to a culture in which the available time becomes even more densely occupied. Artmund Rosa's theory of social acceleration is particularly relevant here. Modern societies often respond to increases in speed, not by slowing down, but by multiplying activities, expectations, and obligations. Acceleration produces further acceleration. This possibility should concern social scientists directly because research itself is a form of cognitive labor. If AI becomes widely integrated into academic life, universities may eventually redefine what counts as normal productivity. The issue will no longer be what researchers can do, but what institutions expect them to do. For this reason, the future impact of AI cannot be understood only at the level of individual users. It must also be analyzed at the level of organizations, incentives, and social expectations. Um, do I have 5 more minutes?
Professor. Yeah, you have 5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Research is also a form of cognitive work, and the use of AI may alter the social and organizational conditions of such work. When a new technology is first adopted, the person who uses may gain an advantage. A task that previously required 2 weeks may be completed in much less time. At this early stage, the user appears more capable and may temporarily experience greater control over time. But this situation may not last. Once technology spreads, organizations can redefine normal productivity. The time saved by the individual is not necessarily returned as free time, slower and better work, or greater autonomy. It can become the basis for higher demands, more outputs in the same week, shorter deadlines, or reduction in staff. A concrete example helps us explain the mechanism. A professional working in training program design previously completed approximately one project every 2 weeks. When she began using AI early, she could complete tasks much more quickly, while the organization initially continued to request approximately one project per week. After 2 years, as AI supported production became normal, the organization requested 3 projects per week and that removed one job position. The technology did not result in less work for the remaining professional. It contributed to a new level of expected outputs and greater pressure. This example should be presented as an illustrative case, not as a general empirical proof, of course. Its value is that it makes a sociological hypothesis visible. Technological gains are distributed through organizational relations. A tool that could reduce effort may become a mechanism for intensifying work when efficiency gains are appropriated as new standards of performance. Let us look at the deeper mirror effect between these two dimensions. There is a structural symmetry here. Just as epistemic delegation may remove part of your intellectual authorship in the field of knowledge, the automation of instrumental tasks may remove control over your time in labor market. In both cases, if technology is governed only by algorithmic defaults and organizational pressure, the human agent is pushed downstream, becoming either a passive curator of generated meanings or a worker subjected to intensified hyperproductivity. This connects to the early epistemological discussion. In the knowledge production, AI may reduce the researcher's control over the origin of interpretation. In the organization work, it may reduce the worker's control over the time that efficiency appears to release. These are not identical processes, but both raise the same question: who governs the benefit of technology? This is a selected bibliography. I would like to send you the slides. Uh, Maybe I already did it. But let me close this lecture with the opening question. Um, does AI assist sociology or does it transform sociology? The answer is that it can do both. AI can expand our ability to examine text, compare arguments, and construct exploratory scenarios. A sociology that ignores these capacities would risk isolating itself from important developments in knowledge production. At the same time, AI transforms the condition of research when it enters production of categories, hypotheses, and interpretations. It creates particular risks. Fluent language may be mistaken for valid insights. Simulation may be treated as substitutes for social reality. Algorithmic defaults may normalize dominant narratives, and responsibility may become unclear when interpretations emerge through opaque systems. The practical conclusion is not prohibition, it's a criterion of responsibility. We can delegate certain procedures when the delegation is visible, checked, and appropriate. We can use AI to explore possibility, search materials, or test questions, but the sociologist must remain able to explain categories, the evidence on which argument depends, the alternative considered, and the consequences of representation. A future social science shaped by AI should therefore protect four commitments. First, technical literacy. Sociologists need to understand what this tool can and cannot do. Second, empirical accountability. Interpretations must remain connected to the world and to the voices being studied. Third, epistemic transparency. The path from material to conclusion must be open to examination. Fourth, institutional responsibility. University and research organization must not build systems that reward only speed, quality, and automated output. Before we finish, let me add one more reflection. Another possible consequence concerns inequality. Traditionally, sociologists discuss the digital divide as unequal access to technology. Some people had access to digital resources and others did not. With AI, a different divide may emerge. The crucial difference may no longer concern access alone, but the ability to use AI critically. Today, many students have access to the same tools. The question is no longer simply who possesses AI, but how it is used. Some individuals may rely on AI mainly as a source of ready made answers. Others may use it as a tool for exploration, questioning, and intellectual experimentation while maintaining control over judgment and interpretation. At first sight, these two uses may appear similar. Both individuals use the same technology and may obtain comparable short term results. However, over time, the difference may become significant. A person who consistently delegates understanding may gradually lose confidence in her own analytical capacities. A person who uses AI as a critical interlocutor may instead strengthen those capacities by exposing them to new questions, alternative perspectives, and larger bodies of information. In this sense, future inequalities may not concern information alone. They may also concern epistemic autonomy, the capacity to evaluate, criticize, and justify one's own interpretations rather than simply accepting those produced by a system. Paradoxically, the advantage may not belong to those who use AI the most, but to those who know when to rely on it and when to distance themselves from it. For this reason, I would like to conclude with a personal hope. Many of you will use AI throughout your studies and professional lives. This is almost inevitable. The important question is not whether you use it, but how you use it. My hope is that you will use these systems critically and constructively, not as substitutes for your own judgment, but as a tool that help you think more deeply, explore more broadly, and ask better questions. In the long run, this may be difference that matters the most. The future will probably belong not to those who delegate everything to AI, but to those who remain capable of thinking without allowing, without allowing AI to think in their place. In the end, we have a problem, and this problem cannot be solved simply through prohibition or moral pressure placed on the individuals. It is unrealistic to tell students not to use AI when they are evaluated in competitive environments where others use the same tools. It is equally unrealistic to ask parents to keep their children away from technologies that will probably shape their future educational and professional lives, especially if this means accepting immediate disadvantage. The same applies to researchers. In an academic system governed by publish or perish, where careers depend on publication speed, productivity, and visibility, many scholars will use AI because the system itself pushes them in that direction. Asking them not to do so while leaving those incentives unchanged would be hypocritical. This is also a difference between using AI after one has acquired methods, concepts, and critical judgment, and using it while those capacities are still being formed. For experienced researchers, AI may support existing competence. For students, it may also replace part of the learning process. This is why the issue cannot be reduced to individual morality or heroic abstentions. The solution has to be institutional and collective, changing the rules, incentives, and educational practices that shape how AI is used. But remember, AI does not create the problem for nothing. It accelerates it accelerates and intensifies tendencies that already existed. It appears as the most advanced expression of dominant values: speed, quantity, efficiency, and competition. AI is not simply what makes the system collapse, but what brings its existing logic to the highest level of realization. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Umberto Pagano, for your lecture.
I hope this lecture could be useful. It is a little hard on a distance
Yes.
basis, and I wish I could be there soon. But
Oh, yeah.
thank you for hosting me.
Thank you very much, Professor Pagano. And I'm sure some of the students or all of you also have experience in using AI for learning or for research. But since we only have about 8 minutes left before the end of our program, so maybe I will open only for one or two questions. Anyone who wants to share their opinion, please raise your hand. Ya, oke. We have the first two. Ya, yang di depan saya persis ya, yang pertama ya. Please mention your name and study program.
Hello. Okay, thank you for the thank you for the chance, Professor and lecturers. I am Alexander Dimas from Educational Sociology. I want to ask Professor Umberto about since AI have a LLM, large language models, which are highly convincing and fluent answer based on data on probability. There is a risk of confusing a plausible answer with a valid knowledge, which in sociological standpoint, how we enforce a strict epistemic rationality to counter this illusion of theory or illusion of theory created by AI. Because nowadays, me using AI for do my tasks, do my research, the language in AI is maybe it's easy to understand, but it's confusing to my lecturers to dig into gimana ya? It's confusing for lecturers to understand the language, but in younger generation, we can understand it with easy, with apa ya? With maybe personalized language to us. Thank you.
Okay, could you repeat just the
For the first question from Dimas, if I can make it shorter, uh, he comments that since AI has a large language model that is so convincing in their input and recommendation for user, so how should we clarify the feed from AI when the technology is so convincing? How to validate the information feed by AI to the user?
Yeah, this is the hardest problem, the biggest problem, the convincing and the fluent language of a large language model. That's why we should be very careful in using it. We should not stop at the language. We should start from the language. We should start from the answers as a starting point to deepen our thinking. So, what students do usually is to accept the first answer of the machine. The first answer of the machine is convincing, and this is a problem because usually that first answer can even anticipate the problem. And this, in some way, um, destroys partially our capacity to set a problem and to wonder things and to build questions. And this is a deep problem. We should not stop at the first answer of the machine, but use that answer to start deepening the reasoning, asking the machine, trying to go beyond that answer, try to understand why that answer, what is the logic path of that answer, and we probably we begin to discover that a part of that answer is casual. A part of that answer is not convincing. We begin to discover contradictions in the answer of the machine. So the first secret is not to be happy from the first answer, and maybe even compare more systems, more artificial intelligences. From this comparison, we can start to deepen our thinking. We can discover disalignment in answering, and from that we can start a new path of thinking. So never accept in a flat way the answers of the machine. even if because the principal problem, the main problem, is that the language is flat. The language is easy, uh, and uh, our brain, in some way, uh, perception of our brain when when we see something smooth is that it is correct, but smooth does not necessarily mean correct. So this is the crucial problem. The fact that the answer is smooth, the answer is easy, and uh, we must never, as researchers and students and scholars, we must never be happy from the first answer.
Thank you very much, Professor Umberto Pagano, and I have to apologize to you, all the participants. We're already running out of time, so and once again, thank you, Professor, for joining our session today and giving your lecture about how AI can impact our learning and research process. And yeah, that's it. Please give applause to Professor Umberto Pagano. And this is the end of, yeah, thank you very much. And this is the end of the Eurasia Lecture Series 2026. And before we leave the room, let's have a ceremonial closure for our program and take group pictures together. Yeah, thank you very much. And now I close the forum. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Zoom meeting, please open your video feed. We are going to take group pictures together. Count of 3, yeah? 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, thank you very much and have a pleasant day. And thank you very much, Professor Umberto Pagano. We will send you.
I hope to see you soon in person.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have a closing remarks, now is the time. Okay, so we will keep in touch. I will text or send you an email regarding the